January 26, 1945, near the village of Holtzwihr in the frozen east of France. A 19-year-old American lieutenant stands alone on top of a burning tank destroyer, a machine he knows could explode beneath him at any second. In front of him, across a field of snow, 6 German tanks and waves of infantry are grinding forward to wipe out his company. His men have pulled back into the woods. He has not. Gripping the vehicle's heavy machine gun, he turns it on the advancing enemy and refuses to step down. His name is Audie Murphy. In a single hour on that freezing afternoon, this slight young man from a Texas cotton farm would do something so far beyond ordinary courage that it would make him the most decorated American soldier of the entire war. He would stand on a flaming wreck, wounded and alone, and hold back an armored attack until he ran out of ammunition. Then he would climb down and lead his men forward. This is the story of how a boy nobody wanted as a soldier became a legend on a burning tank, and what that single hour cost him for the rest of his life. To understand what happened at Holtzwihr, you have to picture the ground. This was the Colmar Pocket, the last corner of French soil the German army still held, a frozen landscape of snow-covered fields and dark, dripping forests in the bitter winter of early 1945. The cold was a weapon all its own. Men could not dig into the iron-hard earth, frostbite filled the aid stations. Into this misery came the 3rd Infantry Division, ordered to clear the woods and villages one by one, and among its riflemen was a young officer who had already seen more war than men twice his age. Out across the white fields, the enemy was coming. German tanks rolled forward in line, their engines a low thunder, with foot soldiers spread out between them, perhaps 200 and more, moving toward the thin American line at the edge of the trees. Against them stood the survivors of a single rifle company, worn down to a fraction of its strength, and 2 American tank destroyers parked on the road. In a few minutes, one of those tank destroyers would be a ball of fire, and a 19-year-old would make a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. Before we go on, if you love these true stories of courage from the Second World War, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and to give this video a like, and stay with us all the way to the end, because the man at the center of this story is far more than the 1 hour that made him famous. To understand why a teenage officer would climb onto a burning tank rather than run for cover, you have to know where he came from, and just how long and hard the road was that brought him to that frozen, snow-covered field in eastern France. Audie Murphy was born in 1925 into a family of Texas sharecroppers, one of a dozen children scratching a living out of other men's cotton fields. His father drifted away. His mother died when he was a teenager. Audie left school in the 5th grade to pick cotton and hunt rabbits, to feed his younger brothers and sisters, learning early the patience and the deadly aim that would later keep him alive. He was small, quiet, and baby-faced, and when war came, he was so slight and young-looking that more than one branch of the service turned him away before the army finally took him. Almost no one who met him expected much. He was turned down by the Marines and the paratroopers, and on his first day of training he fainted in the heat. Some wanted to wash him out or make him a cook, but once Audie Murphy reached the front, something in him changed everything. From the landings in Sicily and Italy, through the brutal beachhead at Anzio, and into the invasion of southern France, he proved again and again to be a natural soldier, calm under fire, quick to act, and utterly determined. He rose from messenger to sergeant and finally earned a battlefield commission as an officer. By the time his division reached the Colmar Pocket in January 1945, Murphy had already been wounded, had already lost close friends, and had already won a chest full of medals for one act of bravery after another. He was barely 19, but the men of Company B looked to him as a veteran. Command of the company had fallen to him after losses among the officers, and command meant responsibility for the lives of every soldier still standing. Now those soldiers were dug in at the edge of a frozen wood called the Bois de Redouire, directly in the path of a German counterattack. The fighting in those woods had already been a nightmare. Days earlier, other American units had pushed toward Holtzwihr and been torn apart in the open by German tanks and infantry, unable to dig in, cut down in the snow. Now it was Company B's turn to hold the line. Murphy had perhaps a couple of dozen able men left, 2 tank destroyers for support, and orders that came down clear and simple over the field telephone. Hold your position. Help was supposed to be on the way, but it had not arrived, and out beyond the trees, the enemy was forming up to attack. Early in the afternoon of January 26, the German assault opened the way these things usually did, with artillery. Shells came shrieking down on the American line, throwing up fountains of snow and splintering the frozen trees, forcing the riflemen to press themselves flat into whatever cover they could find. Murphy moved among his men, steadying them, knowing this storm of fire was only the prelude. When the shelling lifted, the real attack would come. He peered out across the white field toward the village, and there it was, the thing every infantryman dreaded most. Out of Holtzwihr came the tanks, 6 of them by the count in the records, squat steel shapes crawling across the snow with their guns swinging toward the woods. Spread between and behind them came the German infantry, rank after rank, far more men than the handful of defenders could hope to stop with rifles alone. It was the kind of sight that breaks a unit and sends it running. Murphy looked at his exhausted, outnumbered company, looked at the oncoming armor, and made the first of the decisions that would define that day. He would not let his men be slaughtered in the open. He ordered Company B to fall back into the prepared positions deeper in the woods, where the trees would give them cover and the German tanks could not easily follow. But someone had to stay forward to direct the American artillery, the one weapon that could break up the attack before it overran them. That someone was Murphy. He stayed out near the front with a field telephone crouched by his command post, calling down shellfire on the advancing enemy and reading off corrections as the explosions walked closer and closer to the German ranks. He was, by choice, the most exposed man on the battlefield. For a while the artillery did its terrible work, and the snowy field was churned with smoke and blast. But the German tanks kept coming, and now they were close. One of the 2 American tank destroyers took a direct hit. Flame burst from it, black smoke boiling into the gray sky, and its crew scrambled clear and ran for the cover of the trees. The second sat silent and useless. Murphy was almost out of rifle ammunition, the enemy was nearly upon him, and by every reasonable measure the moment had come to drop the telephone and run for the woods like everyone else. Instead, he stayed. What he did next, the men watching from the tree line could scarcely believe. The burning tank destroyer in front of him was a death trap, loaded with fuel and ammunition, liable to blow apart at any instant, but mounted on top of it was a heavy .50 caliber machine gun still intact with a field of fire straight down the German advance. To Murphy, half-frozen and nearly out of options, that gun was the one thing that might still hold the line. He made his choice, scrambled forth through the snow, and climbed up onto the flaming hull. Standing on a vehicle that could explode beneath his boots, wreathed in oily smoke, Audie Murphy took hold of the .50 caliber machine gun and opened fire. The Germans were astonished. They had watched the tank destroyer burn and assumed it was finished, and now a storm of heavy fire was tearing into them from the very wreck they had written off. The big gun hammered in his hands, its tracers reaching out across the snow into the advancing infantry. From 3 sides the enemy poured fire back at him, but the thick smoke pouring off the burning hull half hid him, and shot after shot went wide. What followed was almost an hour unlike anything else in the war. Alone on the flaming tank destroyer, Murphy swept the field with the machine gun, breaking up each rush of infantry as it came. When a squad of Germans crawled along a ditch toward his flank, hoping to get close enough to finish him, he turned the gun on them before they could spring their trap. Some of the enemy got within a stone's throw of the wreck and were stopped there. All the while, the vehicle smoldered and cracked beneath him, and the battle's noise was so great that the men in the woods could only watch and wonder how he was still alive. The most extraordinary part is that Murphy never stopped doing his other job. With one hand, he fought the machine gun. With the other, whenever he could, he worked the field telephone he had dragged up with him, still calling American artillery down on the swarming enemy. As the story has long been told, when a startled officer on the other end asked how close the Germans were to his position, Murphy answered that if they would just hold the line a moment, he would let them speak to one themselves. Whether or not every word is exact, it captured the man, ice calm and grimly joking in the middle of an inferno. The combined effect was devastating to the attack. The German infantry, cut down and pinned by the machine gun and the falling shells, could no longer keep pace with their own tanks. And tanks without infantry to protect them are dangerously blind and vulnerable, easy prey for soldiers with anti-tank weapons in close country. One by one, the German tanks lost their nerve for the push, and the great assault that was meant to sweep Company B out of the woods began to stall and break apart in the bloody snow. All of it stopped by the fire from a single burning wreck. Murphy was not untouched. At some point in that hour, a German round tore into his leg, but he barely seemed to notice it, staying at the gun and firing as long as the ammunition lasted. Only when the last belt was spent and the barrel finally fell silent did he stop. He was scorched, bleeding, half-deafened, and still standing on a tank that had been burning the entire time. By any law of probability, he should have been dead a dozen times over. Yet, as the smoke drifted across the torn field, the impossible truth was plain. The line had held, and the man on the burning tank was still alive. Only then did Audie Murphy climb down from the wreck and limp back toward the woods, the burning tank destroyer still smoking behind him. He had been alone out there for the better part of an hour against an armored attack, and he had stopped it. When he reached his men, the first thing he did was refuse medical treatment for his wounded leg. There was no time for it. The German attack was broken, but it was not yet beaten, and Murphy understood that the surest way to save his company was not merely to survive the assault, but to drive the enemy back while they were reeling. So, bleeding and exhausted, he gathered the survivors of Company B and organized them for a counterattack. These were men who had watched their teenage commander do the impossible in plain view, and now he was asking them to follow him out of the safety of the trees and back into the fight. They went, pushing forward through the shattered, smoking woods and across the snow. The company drove the shaken German infantry and their remaining tanks back the way they had come, away from the wood line they had so nearly overrun, securing the position that the whole bloody afternoon had been about. Soldiers who were there struggled afterward to put what they had seen into words. One sergeant described how the young lieutenant had killed the enemy wherever they appeared, in the draws, in the meadows, among the trees, while the storm of return fire somehow never found him through the smoke. Spoke of the cold nerve it took to stand on a burning vehicle and call down artillery on troops only yards away. It was the kind of stand that turns a man's name into something larger than himself, and word of what Murphy had done began to travel far beyond his own division. The action at Holtzwihr was one piece of a larger, grinding battle, but it mattered. Company B's stand and counterattack helped hold a vital stretch of the line in the Colmar Pocket, the last German foothold in France, which the Allies finally crushed in the weeks that followed. For Murphy, the fight had lasted about an hour and had cost him a wound he shrugged off, but it would change the course of his life completely. The slight, unwanted recruit from the Texas cotton fields had just earned his country's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor, at the age of 19. A few months later, on a sunlit airfield in Austria, with the war in Europe finally over, a general pinned the Medal of Honor to Audie Murphy's chest. He came home to a hero's welcome, his boyish face on the cover of a national magazine, the most decorated American combat soldier of the Second World War. Hollywood took notice. In time, Murphy became a film actor, and in one of the strangest turns of his strange life, he starred as himself in the movie of his own war memoir, reliving on screen the very battles that had nearly killed him. But the legend carried a hidden wound. Like so many who saw too much, Murphy brought the war home inside him. He suffered from terrible nightmares and sleeplessness, from the jangled nerves and dark moods that his generation called battle fatigue and that we now call post-traumatic stress. In an age that rarely spoke of such things, Murphy did something quietly brave all over again. He talked about it openly, urging his country to care for the unseen wounds of its veterans. The man who had feared nothing on the burning tank was honest about the fear he could never fully outrun. Audie Murphy died in 1971 at just 45 in the crash of a small plane and was buried with honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where his simple headstone is among the most visited graves in the country. People still come to ask the same question that hangs over that frozen field at Holtzwihr. Why would a 19-year-old climb onto a burning tank and stay there? The answer he gave was always simple. His men were behind him, and someone had to hold the line. If you had family who served in the Second World War, share their name in the comments and tell us one thing about them. So many never came home. The least we can do is remember them by name. Subscribe if you would like the next story.